Hello, my name is Nola Littrell, and I was born September the 25th, 1900, in Macon County, Tennessee. I had a lovely childhood, just wonderful. But when I was 15 years old, I fell in love, and I married William Harvey Littrell. And over the years, we had 8 children. I am sorry to say that we lost 2 of them before they were grown. Anyhow, we moved to Cookeville in 1930 to a little house on Gentry Avenue, which is, I'm told now, called Polly Avenue. That's located behind a local school. I believe it's called Parkview. Well, anyway, I started working at the Columbia Produce and at the Mackey store. I'm told that it's now called Institutional Wholesale. Well, one day, our son Clay and daughter Diane were walking to the Princess Theater to see a movie, and an electric wire fell on top of Diane and injured her something awful. She did recover somewhat and receive a settlement from the electric company of Cookeville, and then she bought us a house in Bushtown with that money. And we lived there until 1952, when I sold it to the Putnam County Board of Education and bought us another house on 9th Street across from what was then the Tech Village. Oh, I had such an interest in life, and I really did love living in Cookeville. You know, there are things that happen in smaller communities that most everybody knows about and talks about. And then there are those things that only a few people know about, and it is deliberately kept quiet. Well, I want to share with you one of those quiet events that happened right here in Cookeville, right here in the Cookeville City Cemetery. Now listen. Any you ever heard of Lester Joseph Gillis? Well, how about George Nelson? Well, how about Babyface Nelson? Oh, okay now. Now then we're going. You probably know that Babyface Nelson was a bank robber and murderer in the 1930s. But I bet you didn't know that he had connections to Cookeville, Tennessee. And that's the truth now. That's God's whole truth, I'm telling you. Everything I'm going to tell you is the truth. Now, Lester was born December the 6th, 1908 in Chicago, Illinois. Unfortunately, his life of crime began when he was only 12 years old. He accidentally shot a fellow child in the jaw with a pistol that he had found, and then he had to serve over a year in a state reformatory school. When he got out, that didn't do a thing for him because he grew older. His life of crime only increased. He became involved with a group of young thieves called strippers. Car strippers, I mean, you know, they take the hubcaps and the tires and things like that off the cars, car strippers. And this put him in touch with a lot of the local Chicago criminals. Now, in April of 1933, Babyface robbed his first bank, making off with $4,000. Now, that was a lot of money in 1933. Why, he even stole the jewels of the Chicago mayor's wife. Yeah, went right into the house, him and some of his thugs, and just stole her jewelry. And when the police were talking to her, she described one of the thieves as having a baby face. And that's how Lester became known as Babyface Nelson. Well, I could go on and on about his criminal activities, but we would be here forever and a day, so I'll just say that his robberies continued and more guns became involved, and there were many innocent people lost their lives. Now, there were occasions that would leave the state of Illinois in his illegal activities and come south. Oh, yes, he came south. To be exact, he visited Cookeville, Tennessee quite often. Now, that's the truth. I'm telling you, it's the truth. You want to know how I know that? Because he came here to visit his grandmother, my dear friend. We'll just call her Mrs. Wallace. Now, see, my son Clay would run around with Lester when Lester was visiting here, and he would come over and pick up Clay and some of the other guys, and they'd go out for the night. Now, you must understand there was no criminal activities that took place, not when he was in Cookeville. Now, my Clay was a good boy, and so were the other boys, and Lester would never, ever put his grandma, or me, for that matter, in an uncomfortable or embarrassing situation or position, especially here in Cookeville. It's so hard for me to say this, but Lester reaped what he sowed. His criminal career ended on November the 27th, 1933, in a horrible gun battle in Barrington, Illinois. It was called the Battle of Barrington. And you know, that poor dear boy had 17 shots put in him at Barrington by FBI agents. Well, I guess you must understand here that Babyface had killed more FBI agents at that time than any other criminal, so I suppose they were getting even, or whatever you might want to call it. Babyface Nelson was a hot-tempered fella. He didn't hesitate to kill a lawman or innocent bystanders or anybody or anything for that matter. But regardless of the stories that was told on him, he was, believe it or not, he was a family man. Loved his wife dearly, loved his son and daughters. And like I said, his wife Helen was so devoted to him, and he loved her dearly. Well, I'm giving you all this information only to tell you this. Now, this is what all this has been about. Lester Joseph Gillis is buried. Yes, that's right. He's buried in the Cookeville City Cemetery. I just bet you don't believe me. But I've been telling you, it's the truth. There was another story told to the public, and yet another told to the bigwigs in Washington, D.C. Now, I know that you want to know where he's buried. Well, I know where he's buried. I absolutely know, because his friend, or my friend, she was his too, I guess, but she was his grandma. But she told me, she showed me where he was buried, so I know. You can believe what you want to about Babyface Nelson's burial place. But I just told you that he's buried in the Cookeville City Cemetery. Right here in Cookeville. Well, now you listen, it makes sense if you think about it. His dear mother, Mary, did not want her son's body or grave bothered. So she and Helen secretly had his remains brought here to Cookeville and buried in an unknown grave. That's right. You're not going to find a gravestone over there at the cemetery with his name on it. You're not going to find it. It's not there. Anyway, you'll read in the newspaper at the time, and you can go on these computers now, I think that's what they call them, and look at his name up, and they're going to tell you that he was buried in Illinois, but that is not the truth. You can read that he had a graveside funeral right there in River Grove at St. Joseph Cemetery. But I've been told that Helen, oh my, I've been talking too long, that Helen secretly had his remains brought here and buried in this unknown grave in the Cookeville City Cemetery. Yes, indeed. She's buried there. Oh, yeah, she's buried in St. Joe's Cemetery, but not Lester. Lester Joseph Gillis, Babyface Nelson, once public enemy number one, is buried by his grandma Wallace in the northwest corner of the Cookeville City Cemetery. That's right, the northwest corner. Now, I've been told that sometimes real late at night, if you look hard, you might just see him. I don't know if I believe that or not, but I do know that there's a great old big stone up there, and it says Wallace on it, and that's all it says. Just a big old long stone with the word Wallace on it. And then there's just some grass around it, just some land, no marker, no nothing. Well, I know you probably don't believe me, but it's the truth. His mother always defended him. Most mothers would, wouldn't they? She finally came to terms with his life and would admit his ending was expected and probably for the best. Well, now, I've said over and over that you may not believe me, but it's the truth. You go up there someday in that Cookeville City Cemetery, and you go to that northeast corner, and you're going to see a big old, I believe it's a pinkish color headstone. And you're going to see Wallace. And then you're going to see all this grass around it with no other tombstones. That's where Babyface Nelson, public enemy number one in the 1930s in this country, is buried, so help me.